25th anniversary, Arirang TV's launching since 1997. Arirang.
Coming up on Arirang News. South Korea is considering compensation for the Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor through its own public foundation. But this proposal is strongly decried by the victims and their families. Last year, South Korea's tech exports recorded an all-time high. This is despite the sluggish global economy and thanks to strong sales of semiconductors. By the end of the decade, nuclear power is planned to account for more than a third of South Korea's electricity mix. Same goes for renewable energy by 2036. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea, and thank you for joining us on Arirang News. It's been one of the issues at the center of long-frayed South Korea-Japan relationship. Today, the Korean government put forth creating a domestic fund to compensate Korean victims of Japan's wartime forced labor. This, however, sparked strong protests from the victims. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji leads our coverage tonight.
At a public hearing at the National Assembly on Thursday, an official from South Korea's foreign ministry revealed the government's plan to compensate the victims of Japan's wartime forced labor through a public foundation, rather than from the Japanese firms responsible. The public foundation will be funded by donations from domestic companies. The Director General for Asia and Pacific Affairs, Seo Min-jung, said the government came up with the solution as its priority is to arrange the payments as soon as possible, as many victims have already passed away or are in their 90s.
Through detailed review, we found that the key to resolving this issue is to arrange the payments first, even if that means getting the funds from a third party. We will meet the victims and their families to ask for consent.
But victims supporting civic groups and opposition party lawmakers protested the plan. Some boycotted the event, saying this issue cannot be resolved without a sincere apology and participation from the accused Japanese firms, adding this way of compensation is completely ignoring the victims' human rights. Thursday's public hearing comes after the Supreme Court made landmark rulings in 2018, ordering two Japanese companies, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and Nippon Steel, to compensate the Korean victims of forced labor during the Japanese colonial rule. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
South Korea and the United States are holding a large-scale military drill aimed at countering North Korea's weapons of mass destruction. According to a newspaper run by Seoul's Defense Ministry on Thursday, the training seeks to detect and destroy facilities suspected of storing such arms. It starts off with a break-in into the suspected venue, followed by tracking down enemies hiding in the bunker and finally eliminating dangerous materials. Pundits believe the latest drill comes in response to potential biochemical warfare. The four-day exercise lasts until Friday. Top diplomats and defense leaders representing the U.S. and Japan have gathered in Washington and agreed to promote the Trilateral framework with South Korea against North Korea's belligerence. Our Unification Ministry correspondent Kim Mo-kyun reports.
One of the major discussion points by top diplomats of the U.S. and Japan was how to strengthen trilateral cooperation with South Korea to combat North Korea's provocations.
Japan's strategies align closely with our own national security strategy, both in the key challenges that we identify, as well as in how to effectively address them. We're committed to upholding shared values of democracy and human rights, defending the international rule of law, continuing to lead the world in tackling global challenges that no one country can solve alone.
Such remarks were made during a press conference that followed the 2+2 security talks between the U.S. State Secretary Anthony Blinken and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and their Japanese counterparts Yoshimasa Hayashi and Yasukazu Hamada. The two countries condemned North Korea's missile and nuclear threats and vowed to continue their trilateral efforts with South Korea to, quote, deter or defend against any type of aggression. Washington also reaffirmed its support for Japan's new national security strategy, where Tokyo had vowed to double its defense spending to boost its counterstrike capabilities. Washington also reaffirmed its commitment on providing a full range of extended deterrence to its allies, including nuclear capabilities. Such developments come amid concerns of more provocations from North Korea, as the regime fired a record-breaking number of some 70 missiles in the past year. Representatives of the two sides also classified China as the greatest strategic challenge for the allies, pointing at what they refer to as China's unlawful and coercive actions in the South China Sea. They vowed that Washington and Tokyo would continue efforts to maintain peace in the Taiwan Straits. The latest agreements have garnered much attention as they could be seen as a blueprint for the bilateral summit between U.S. President Joe Biden and Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in Washington on Friday. Kim Mo-gyan, Arirang News.
In the thousands of proposals submitted by ordinary citizens to the presidential office in the third quarter of last year, the keyword seems to have been COVID-19. On Thursday, the presidential office released an analysis of some 25,000 proposals received from citizens in the initial period of the new system from June to late September. It said more than 90% of these submissions received a response from the government after review by the relevant ministry. The most frequently mentioned issue was COVID-19, many of the requests pertaining to compensation for business losses caused by COVID-19 prevention measures. The presidential office said 17 of the requests have been made part of government policy, including the suspension of payments into the national healthcare system for those struggling financially. Less than a week ago, China reopened its borders and lifted its zero-COVID rules for the first time in more than 1,000 days. British news magazine The Economist says China's reopening will be the biggest economic event of 2023. Our business correspondent Kim Hyun-sung looks into the global economic impact of China's reopening.
For 1,016 days, China's borders had been clamped shut in an effort to ward off COVID-19. But last Sunday, they finally reopened, bringing newfound optimism for the economy.
The opening up and the reopening of the Chinese economy is a strong positive lever for 2023.
This is Myeongdong, an area that used to be popular among Chinese tourists. Since the start of the pandemic, this once bustling district had for a while become almost a ghost town. But with overseas tourism returning, so has foot traffic here. And with Chinese borders reopening, this area holds the potential of once again returning to its heyday. With China only just reopening and with South Korea restricting arrivals from China due to concerns about COVID-19, the full buying power of Chinese tourists has not yet reached Korea's tourism sector. But locals wait, hopefully, for when it does.
It was really tough. For almost 3 years, I had to work in delivery and construction because I couldn't sell. I only came back in recent months to sell, and my wife and I are hopeful that this area will fully bounce back when Chinese tourists once again visit.
Already, businesses that had left Myeongdong are returning. The vacancy rate for local stores had climbed during South Korea's lockdowns, but it's starting to tick down in recent days, and industry experts expect it to go down even further once the Chinese tourists can travel without COVID restrictions. But not everyone shares an optimistic outlook. Some are concerned that China's reopening could push up commodity prices even further.
As China eliminates its zero-COVID policy, their production will increase, and that will help reduce inflation. But there's a contrary point of view. In the short run, it may even increase inflation because China's demand for oil and commodities may rise before their production.
Goldman Sachs has projected that oil prices would climb by about $15 per barrel as China regains its appetite for oil imports. China's lockdown was a never-before-seen experiment, so experts vary in their projections on how this new reopening will swing the global economy. But there's one view they all share. China's reopening is likely to make a big splash. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
Despite the global economic slowdown, South Korea's tech exports last year were the highest for any year since related data were first compiled, thanks to robust sales of semiconductors. Our economic correspondent Shin Ha-young has the details.
South Korea's economic growth slowed down last year, but exports of tech were stronger than ever. According to a Trade Ministry report released Thursday, exports in the tech sector in 2022 rose by 2.5% from a year earlier to around $233 billion. That's the highest for any year since related data were first compiled, breaking the previous record set in 2021. Tech accounted for 34% of the country's overall outbound shipments, driven mainly by a few items in particular. Shipments of semiconductors rose to a record high of around $131 billion, for an on-year increase of 1.7%. Specifically, exports of system chips increased 27.5% from a year earlier to an all-time high of $50.7 billion. There were increases also for secondary batteries, OLED displays, and mobile phones, with related equipment performing particularly well. By destination, exports to China dropped due to Beijing's zero-COVID policy, but China was still the biggest importer, accounting for more than $100 billion of the total. It was followed by Vietnam at nearly $37 billion and the U.S. with over $29 billion. Meanwhile, South Korea's imports of ICT products amounted to $152.5 billion last year, resulting in a trade surplus of almost $81 billion. However, one expert says it's unlikely tech exports will reach those levels this year because demand for chips is declining.
Investment in internet data centers, which are drivers of chip demand, has been delayed by the global economic slowdown. As a result, demand for chips is expected to decline, leading to a fall in chip exports.
Meanwhile, on Thursday, to give a boost to the country's tech industry, the Ministry of Science and ICT unveiled a plan to invest about 156 billion Korean won, or roughly $125 million, in strategic technologies, which include semiconductors, quantum computing, supercomputers, and superconductors. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
In an effort to curb emissions, this country is ramping up electricity generation from nuclear power plants. By the end of the decade, it's expected to account for more than 1/3 of the power mix here in Korea. And by 2036, the same goes for renewable energy. Nuclear plants and renewable energy could each account for more than 1/3 of total power generation in South Korea by 2036. On Thursday, the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy announced its 10th basic plan for long-term electricity supply and demand, which includes reforms to the country's electricity mix with the aim of achieving greater reductions of emissions. Under President Yoon Suk-yeol's pledge to make South Korea a nuclear reactor superpower, the aim is to raise the proportion of nuclear power to almost 35% of the country's total production capacity by 2036. In 2018, nuclear power accounted for about 23%. A third of capacity is also to come from renewable sources, a sharp increase from the 6% recorded in 2018. Hydrogen and ammonia will account for more than 7%. In the nearer term, the goal by 2030 is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from 2018 levels by 40%. By 2030, nuclear is expected to rise to more than 32% of the total. The ministry said to achieve the plan, construction at the Shinhanul nuclear power plant on reactors 3 and 4, having been stalled by political disagreements, is to be resumed in 2024. The plan also aims to increase renewable energy to more than 20% and the proportion of coal to be reduced to under 20%. The renewable energy mix, currently concentrated on solar panels, will expand more into wind power. Amid soaring energy prices, the South Korean government will increase discounts on gas bills for low-income households. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said on Thursday that the maximum discount on gas bills will be expanded by 50% for low-income households. This comes as the government ups its effort to ease the burden of heating expenses during the winter season. The move will raise the discount cap for people with severe disabilities and households living on welfare. The discount cap will be raised from roughly $20 to $29 from this month. The government is seeking to ease the tax burden on people who temporarily own two homes. Under the latest effort, these owners will be exempt from heavier taxation should they offload one of the homes within 3 years. Our Finance Ministry correspondent Lee Dae-hyun explains.
More tax benefits for homeowners who buy a second house. This latest policy change will be applied from Thursday. The decision was announced in a ministerial meeting held by Finance Minister Chu Kyung-ho on Thursday. The measure has been introduced to reduce the tax burden on people with two houses if they meet certain conditions. Part of the latest policy is the comprehensive real estate holding tax benefit that applies to people with two houses who sell their original houses within 3 years of buying their second home.
Although the government already extended the period from 1 to 2 years in May 2022, there are still concerns that these people could not sell during that time due to low housing transactions. So the ministry decided to extend this period to 3 years.
During the 3-year period, owners of two homes will be eligible for the same tax deduction as single home owners. Owners of a single property with a declared value of up to 12 billion won, or around $963,000 do not have to pay this tax. Also, transfer income tax and acquisition tax benefits will now be given to owners of two homes with properties located in regulated areas who sell within 3 years. This is extended to 3 years from the previous 2 years. A maximum of 80% of a special tax deduction for long-term holdings will also be given to house owners in this category. While the revised policy will be officially implemented in February, the ministry said it will be applied retroactively starting Thursday. Meanwhile, during the meeting, the nurturing of 10 deep tech-related unicorn companies was also discussed. Deep tech refers to technology solutions based on substantial scientific or engineering challenges. To boost these companies globally, the Ministry of Science and ICT announced that it plans to inject 15 trillion won, or more than $12 billion, into these startups by 2027. Specifically, the ministry aims to financially support startup companies for the next 3 years using government funds. A National Technology Strategic Center will be established to monitor and strengthen investments in research and development. Government-funded research institutes, companies, and universities will also be encouraged to cooperate to develop technology and nurture talents. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
The bereaved families and the survivors of the Itaewon crowd crush share their stories today at the National Assembly's Parliamentary Probe Committee. A total of 11 witnesses came forward, including shopkeepers from the area where the crowd crush happened, so that the Parliamentary Committee could hear their experiences and discuss ways to prevent such tragedies in the future. They called for a thorough investigation into the incident and blamed the authorities for the response. Based on what was shared at previous hearings and experts' opinions, the special committee will now prepare a report to sum up their investigation. As the fight for control of the eastern Ukrainian towns of Soledar and Bakhmut continues, Russia's defense minister has appointed a new commander of the country's so-called special military operation in Ukraine, General Valery Gerasimov. According to Russia's defense ministry on Wednesday, the general will replace the current commander Sergei Surovikin as criticism mounts over his handling of the stalled campaign. Meanwhile, Poland is going to send Leopard battle tanks to Ukraine. Polish President Duda said this in a meeting Wednesday in Lviv with Ukrainian President Zelensky, who welcomed the decision. It would be the first time a Western-made tank has been sent to Ukraine since the war began. The Leopard tank is manufactured in Germany, and its re-export would need the approval of the German government. Out of the top 10 best-selling CD albums of 2022 in the U.S., 7 were by K-pop idols. According to the year-end report by the music data tracking firm Luminate and Billboard, the album Proof by the group BTS ranked number 2 on the list, selling over 410,000 copies. An album by the idol group TXT ranked 3rd at over 220,000 copies. Other groups on the list were Stray Kids, Twice, ENHYPEN, and NCT 127. In fact, Stray Kids had 2 albums on the list. Meanwhile, American singer Taylor Swift topped the chart with the album Midnights. Some people in the world are trying to go vegan for the month of January. It's a campaign called Veganuary. Our Kim Jung-sil explains further and shares some of the vegan options that you can enjoy here in South Korea.
Looking to change your diet in the new year? How about going vegan for 1 month? It's actually an international campaign with nearly 3 million people signed up. Dr. Tony Vanelli, head of communications at Veganuary, which organizes the campaign, says people are getting involved because they care about the environment.
So we know so much more now about the impact that animal agriculture is having on the planet, not just climate, which obviously gets a lot of attention, but on land use, which affects biodiversity.
It's a growing trend to care about the environment, health, and also animal welfare. In fact, the market for vegan products in South Korea has grown to $500 million, and globally it's at 20 billion. So South Korean companies are taking the challenge head on. The company Pulmuon, for example, has dived into the vegan restaurant business.
In central Gangnam, where tens of thousands of people live and work, this restaurant right here opened up last spring, serving only vegan dishes.
Customer favorites include the tofu cutlet and the plant-based bulgogi rice ball. Even the drinks on the menu are vegan approved. I asked the brand spokesperson about the secret behind the restaurant's popularity.
This restaurant aligns with the desire of younger consumers to spend money on their values, such as protecting the earth and tackling health issues.
Another South Korean company, CJ Jeiljedang, makes vegan versions of its best-selling items, one of which is dumplings. In the supermarket, vegan dumplings sell for about $4 a package. They're economical, so eating vegan is always an option. Dr. Vernelli says each person who tries going vegan contributes to a big difference to the environment.
Since we started 10 years ago, we've had over 2 million people take part, and we had scientists look at the impact that those 2 million people will have had. And together, it's a huge saving. So it's the carbon equivalent of over 1 million flights from London to Paris. So that's massive. So taken, as a community of people doing this, it really does have an impact.
Kim Jung-sil, Arirang News.
Conditions will stay warm across South Korea, with readings significantly surpassing the seasonal norms. Places like Busan will be very warm at 17 degrees, and with the rise in overall temperatures, air has become much more unstable. Such unstable atmospheric conditions will bring rain to much of South Korea from tonight until this Sunday. As for the amount of rain, the further south you are, the more rain you'll be receiving. Torrential downpours of up to 250 millimeters are expected for mountainous regions of Jeju Island. For the south coast, about 30 to 80 millimeters are in the forecast. The rest of the country, including here in Seoul, will see about 5 to 40. Temperatures will be in the positive range nationwide. Seoul will be starting off at 7 degrees tomorrow. Daily highs in Seoul will get up to 11 degrees, Gwangju 15, Gyeongju will be warm at 18 degrees. In between Saturday and Sunday, rain will turn into snow for some regions. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That brings us to the end of the newscast on this Thursday night. Thank you for watching. Tomorrow we'll be back with the most up-to-date news. Have a lovely night.